I'm just wondering if you can bring me one AA battery.
Okay, show me the Jane.
Oh, yeah. I think it's what's your email?
Marshall G448.
Oh, yeah. I just saw this on the second advantage you're adding to the scenario. I kind of figured,
Yeah.
given the lack of cars there, but
No, I just got 3 minutes slower.
Hey, old age takes its toll.
Catches up to you
I've been
fast.
since you were like 12, dude. Like, it's gonna wear on you. It's like a knee injury.
I love that you say that in like MBAs in the room.
Asher and I both started as freshmen, so.
Yeah, there you go. Was there a 1AC set?
Oh, no,
Oh.
okay, I sent it. I don't actually know if I'm fast enough to get through this. We're about to find out.
That's okay. I hadn't timed the 1AC from yesterday. I didn't get to like 2 cars, so I think you're fine.
Okay. Anybody not good to go?
Give me 1 second. All right, yeah.
Everyone good? Okay. Advanced water pollution, exempting cables, records, size, causing massive water pollution factor from is around as the key driver of death in 2021. Agricultural pollution into water, however, can report that water sources, good sanitation, carriers, sizable space, including organisms, is creating harmful health effects, and devastating calamitous illustrating the large agriculture from blue water sources, industry, raising animals, changing processes, it's harmful water pollution, gives special cases, and water procedures, water pollution, the amount of carrying to impact water systems, water systems, causes serious expansion of emission, creating deaths, causing a collapse of the chain, gives specific causing natural contribution, phosphorus, causing albums to grow, deaths in the Gulf, as well as fertilizer, application flows to electricity, water pollution, phosphorus, Mexico water traffic mass extinction with the blend sufficient to reverse the carotene. In 18, number of oxidized possible samples of the potential of the mass extinction occurs as a result of fertilizer. Risk analysis of the areas where extinction potential have been associated with oxidation areas. We will be headed to develop this program to solve the recovers. We're back to practices that doesn't disappear. The Gulf of Mexico is key reduction to our sufficient LSU. 18, it doesn't look like construction of the area. The world, every extension of the epidemic is usually the user of the administration of phosphorus created the oxygen to trust the ecosystem with the over changes. Goes directly, various computer models is the major forces resizing is that there's a consensus for extinction granted. 18. Oceans and vacations that have a variable effect on others, oxygen realizing or hypoxia. This is probably reversing this and pyramid sugar on the temperature extinction independently for forcing the trees to fertilize causes water pollution. It can be independent innovation 2021. I got personally say everyone was including the CBA because it's against any directly exact rules for the cost pollution, except some samples and animation time reduce pollution. While intercompetition space and encourages example, for competition exempts less than true space water pollution source because access to be complete because cost pollution to pollution to cheaper, because cost pollution society pollution reducing taxes not make financial sense, and recognition of force concentration to these less report the program with this pollution. We can have all water sources, the conventional version of document further research on various value, the cost of material, regulation, and protocol to prevent market from confusion to reduce the products. Failure should be organized to tag will cause flat to 20. Insecure sourcing is much increasing efficiency, is the production of the example of the resources, ecosystems of agriculture needs to be restored by the government. Policies to further the water efficiency, protecting efficiency, reaching water transforming supply chain and exporting water processes. It's time to reach food exports of global work has 17. We face the specific because of social family research challenges in security is a very single price of stable countries and population generating health systems as well as the price self-governance strong access responsibility reaching cubism to using for American forest market explaining the population structure with this treaty was good in the collective 12. Integrated results of resources is self-regulation companies that war plan the increases resource concentrated healthy operations in this because to serve the purposes of clean water and universal resource for schemes and 15. Waterkeeper irritability cases to operate the permanent action country from the capability of increase ability to charge and the capability of schedule to first get the national workers working on the cost of BPC returning the regulatory regime to the free rule era of the NBA's to enhance structural efficiency on whether construction until the emergency part of the construction taking place in the careers resource and development should be implemented for water pollution can be implemented and chief precedent. The core decision for produces a EP authority to regulate conclusion to ignore the state's purpose of the water action to text the plan, clarifies the court prioritizes the purpose of the issue and not the reading of the text of 11. Any court finding the state to do something like the purpose of the court of congressional tech and charge of rules of construction project statute, motion to the drawing board regulation regulation purpose of the EPA authority, or produces based on the support for the meeting court reveals including the meeting regulation of KFS. The decision to interpretation for checking based on water, different reasoning of physics of the expectation to be consistent interpretation with the basis of water. If you keep his interpretation, the actual purpose of conscious self in the decision. The plan clarifies long-standing practice into binding an actual purpose of such interpretation, but the next text of the statute explicitly defines over purpose Act 19. We cannot interpret statutes to get these purposes of purposes of purposes of practical husband, other purposes of interpreting existing purposes, these interpreting existing candidates, the virtue being common representation of text purposes, the purpose candidates, review of injective principle operating interpreting existing purpose, is embracing a new method of interpretation to share concern, words claiming or ambiguous and interpreting the counter-congressional type that breaks down the administrative and environmental statutes extinction clause 17. Hypertext is whether the appears not objective with having this success for like the rating for other just cognitive results rather than this objective which affect course different interpretation of the interpretation because language the court different interpretation of the course of the teacher college software because breakdown the should take course different plan implications of infection pollution as well as this is space machines with resources because responsible structure and social conservation this flash boundaries atlantic cells by chemical pollution acidification water direction phosphorus air pollution human pollution so much of washing so not the pollution so was going concept of social interior water is one of the critical areas the hypertext implications such as CPA as well as American law. Generally, the production suburb with the president of American rules, creating a result will be shocking the first series of result for CPA implications, extending beyond CPA American law as a whole effective and administrative state is key to everything which is machine. The structure of the keep works by the procedures for begins with the New Deal. The Congress of the Ravens for Congress to the Lincoln Falls Regulations for International CPA, Representative Investigation for the Congress of the purpose, coordinate responsibility of people leverage check the glass crisis, regularly directed to the environment is not indispensable extinction part. In that purpose, sections of the world capacity by the NC's which causes the central local conclusion strengthening capacities necessary to get the key backers of local capacity capacity converting capacity of the consequences of alternative society capacity of the current president or version capacity of the local changes of the world hypertext person directs the patent systems levy in 20 years of rules of claims to impossible health because the claims of the person to cut the court makes the appealing countries to the global level intervals but of course to include preamble as the claim is part of the potential ability and claim construction preamble the rules of claims together process there is exemption the preamble of course by the preamble of the project to the process as circular extinction rate 16. Greater global cooperation could be achieved by advancing second globalization, political imperatives, combined to create interesting comfort, peace, and terms of the great chances, internal changes, and general population over second. There are cases of activities with the rapid innovation across the military market MP, also about less concerns for concerning validity, and the perceived weakening of protecting unintended consequences. And very strong MP for company is critical solutions to the machines. Rely upon this like critical emergencies and technical enhanced solutions, conflict of the global to strong stable IP, establishing statutes of regulation, contributing the line of their inactive preamble, preserve selecting solutions flexibility provides much greater predictability to regulate the parties. Second 13. With regulation, there are contract about the nature of potential practices that talk about the principal methods to grab information, can punish parties to regulate parties, specialization, to interpolate preamble, the tax regulation of this purpose, regulation with the reason can interpolate the base purpose, interpreting correctly, as such as the abilities of the person also guides to choose tax, interpret taxes, and like the purposes to certain taxes, as for the same basis, prosecution to registers of regulation, to the purpose of as the wrong construction, kind of serviceable, also creates accounting regulation, meaning it, one of the issues to construction regulations, such as the agency's own justifications, that's key to regulating emerging tech. That is. Hagerman et al. In 18, certainty is key for development of technology strategy potential and using possible strategies with equal in the cases of structure of the likely goals. Does create a strategy of action records from a leader of the unregulated market card, market extinction hackathon. And 17, meteor hacks limited volcanic activity and bacteria product extinction. I can't scroll. Counter implementation without the change, but also counter collaborating every would only have an irreversible shift or lost tech less as formal people. Those marked as formal people.
Which card is that again?
It's the one I can't pronounce.
Okay,
One that starts with an H, very long name.
Yeah.
Irish that I can't pronounce.
Okay.
I'm gonna send a mark copy and also take out cards I didn't read just because.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Just my fears were correct.
Yeah, just the last card you want to get through.
There was one other card I didn't read, and I will do all of that. Okay.
Okay. Oh, it is.
Okay, I sent it.
Oh yeah, let me just.
Yeah.
Cool, I just got it. So, you good?
Yes.
Okay, the court decision that happens as part of the case clarifies the Clean Water Act's purpose, is that right?
Yes.
And the clarification of the purpose prevents conservative judges from, or causes them to use purpose in other cases?
Well, it's not strictly purposivist though. It's like, the point is that it curbs hypertextualism and prevents Supreme Court, or it prevents justices from ignoring the preamble of the kind of statutes like the Clean Water Act.
How does it
Also,
do that?
things like regulations and patents, but
How does it do that?
Hmm.
How does it spill over to those other cases that you're talking about and prevent that hypertextualization?
yeah, so just like stare decisis, precedent is applied in the future. This is sort of the single most egregious example of hypertextualism, given the court interpreted the words prevent discharges to mean Congress cannot require permits in any circumstance, or not Congress, EPA.
Okay, but your Clemens card is just the conservative court just wants to cherry pick words. Why can they not do that under the plan?
Because the conservative judiciary has a tendency to try and apply precedent.
Also, this Stack 19 card talks about creating a kind of enacted purposes canon, which would make it so that the Supreme Court justices, or sorry, not Supreme Court, just justices in general would have to follow this precedent.
Okay, the first advantage, food exports, why do they solve global war?
Because if people do not have the basic things they need to survive, they will fight to get them. That
What do they fight?
destabilizes
How do they
countries.
fight if they don't have food?
Hmm?
Why does that escalate?
Yeah, Castellaw and Clark evidence both say that great powers have interests in regions likely to be destabilized.
It just says like riots. Where do you think it makes
The
it
last line of-
escalation?
The last line of the Clark evidence is like various agencies, quote, all identify famine as a potential trigger for conflicts and possibly even nuclear war.
Okay, that's fine. The admin state scenario, how does the admin state solve like this nebulous extinction impact?
Yeah, it says a bunch of emerging challenges that require collective action, including things like stopping terrorism, diseases, nuclear meltdowns, the impacts of overpopulation, etc. And we have read several cards that those are existential.
Okay, wait, which ones are existential? Sorry, spaced out.
Our card lists things like terrorism, diseases, like meltdowns.
Where have you read cards that those are existential?
There are several, hang on, I can pull lines if you want, but
Yeah.
last line is like, the administrative state isn't optional in our complex society, it's indispensable.
Where do you think that makes the claim that that causes extinction?
Well, it says like, without it, civilization will not continue to exist, which is bad,
Okay, that's fine.
as well as lines about that. But
Okay, I'll send out the ones.
It's the order will be 1,
6, 7 off, and in case the order wants to.
He said 7 off?
yes.
Has everyone got the email? Okay. Is anyone not ready? Okay.
first up is the advanced cap on the ice government should improve all state and federal regulations of concentrated animal feeding operations, incentivize producers to sustainably operate concentrated animal feeding operations, state of agriculture broadly rule that the purpose of statute informs the meaning of statute more than its text unless that statute is the Clean Water Act, to report the regulations saying, 12. Incentives for producers throughout the day results in the lowest cost of product incentives by those that can achieve cheaply, CNC, go work cost vary, according to protection, labor, tech, and other factors, uniform standards, flexibility, to pursue better solutions, people accept policy finances, increase next in states, capital 56 all around territory share, increase its pre-charge digital permitting and auditing of concentrated animal feeding operations in the United States, control water protection, efforts installed by Zone 19. Authority over water department states have sole protective rights. Federalism is hallmark of CWA way fed has the jurisdiction over water. Leaves our relation to states if groundwater manlands and service water to be protecting states must implement laws. Next to this confidence is sad. Confidence is high. Words 220. And that great optimism has remained stable high. Executives expect to grow through improve uptake of highest figures since 2012 US. Rebounded to have CEOs report high confidence about revenue. CEOs benefit from flows of capital protection. Crashes business confidence in the entire economy broken. 19. Business reactions done fast. Short-term was increase was lights down. Start with lower confidence rate. Reactions as for the density percentage GDP is time. Leverage company said credit is bias or negative news coming. Cost reducing staff firms are more cautious than optimistic about the upside fear. Can prevent investments even in reasonable returns. Firms are fresh with polarization and certain regulation drop and confidence lower investment alpha and employment consumption won't be far behind. We can target ourselves into recession. Slow growth causes great power war. Brand 2 on slow growth makes it hard to keep up with having our people leaders have desperately grab resources making national the country. When regime use economic surge in imperial expansion Russia fell into a slump and occupy Manchuria facing between the invaded country plan and fear of decline so powerful. The federalism, the federalism bounce now plan destroys climate response and turns against 121. From Turkey wide partnerships where call begins against state power rate justified and not a single sex through all the implementation lawmakers rushed in power with state governments and environment is almost among the most divisive issues featuring environmental federals does include unrealistic extremes like full centralization, maintaining existing authority, federal state balance critical for environmental protection states municipal regulation defederal state agency power, malfunction power rights for climate change, water pollution, climate change risk extinction in 19. Climate change constitution is so possible to cascading effects to impacts including 3 points, including replacement of IC by liquid ocean, increasing absorption of sunlight, higher ocean temperatures lead to release of methane area, remained on a tap by heat stress wood, dwarf sea level, making extinction more likely, even 1% probably extinction is more important by short times. Next to the starting size, the plan creates a binding precedent. The court should construct a statute according to that purpose that locks in methodological starting sizes, which destroys the rule of law and democracy. 19. And methodology tells which processes are appropriate in terms of meaning. Asking justice to defer to a particular interpretation is different from method that suits across context and establishing meta rules. So methodological are absent from federal interpretation. As the approach to rule of law justice, to ask to defer to the court favorite methodological approach is to apply methodology might be problematic court to determine purposes will be required going forward to confers existing authority on precedent. Saying justice is an expensive risk assessment method are fundamental about the rule of law and democracy. The democracy solves extinction 2019 democracies on a sole democracy should remain competitive policy. That truth is hard. The world less free is one less secure, stable, and prosperous state. And so it's great power conflict here. Migration are aligned democratic institutions. Western retreat, they have bold autocrats and apply dangerous nations without democratic capability. Law draw to expression violence. And state democracies don't fight each other. Democracies fight terror and establish trade. Besides, they can protect that. Solve the world's problems, including climate. The EPA disadvantage. EPA solves chemical pollution now. ING. The binding EPA regular chemicals that bioaccumulate major workflow Trump binding brought to regulations as predictive as possible. EPA is seeking public input on alternative measures. The plan trades off goods C20 EPA enforced dozens of laws, including water pollution, waste dumps, air pollution, and chemicals. The EPA is provided limited resources. The agency determined priorities that all functions can be performed without spreading tooth and chemical accumulation, wrecks, fertility, extinction, Brockovich, in the humankind, coming thanks to chemical decimating fertility, spread counts drop 60%, reach 0 by 2045. PFAS are forever chemicals reaching a breaking point. Current reproductive affairs can't continue to global existential crisis. PFAS are literally confusing our bodies. The anarchy came, protecting water resources, extinguish the species of global war and ecological crisis. The alternative is dissolving government in favor of anarchists, collectivists, and 9. Mismanagement by governments in planetary disaster countries to water resource cutting river systems by state boundaries. Aggravated Turkey to the Kurds or Jordan for Israeli airborne. The Palestinians barred from wells, water wars in Asia. But schemes required for governments projects that be justification for 13 governments. Army Corps installed secret police master of Egypt, Gaddafi, military regimes in South America. Never results as war, violence, poverty, disease, catastrophe. Only free society will restore health. Examples show people cooperate to water resources fairly. The ag advantage. The app doesn't solve raising the cost of production in the U.S. Causes us to import, which makes more dead zones globally. Other types of agriculture, like monocultures and the Arabian Sea, are all causes no dead zone impact and all causes to RTL 15. Anderson new zoological blooms are caused by human interaction between anthropogenic eutrophication is more uncertain. In some cases, HB occurrence and cause association with nutrient limitation complex remains, and those that cannot be cleanly associated. No food wars to lead. A discussion between research officers and policymakers. I think it's a ridiculous resource wars on shouting resource wars and inefficient cost way to resolve conflicts over resources. Food shortages are ubiquitous. Conflicts where local sugar must rise to do not escalate America is insufficient because of export location structure. 16. These people will go hungry for farmers and respond cyclically to pursue business objectives. The developed countries of the export destinations. U.S. ag made up only 9% of total the tiny amount of exports go to hungry countries. So food and exports and food into the U.S. constitute a consequential amount of the nearest country's food, averaging 2%. It's the quarter advantage. It's not essential. Also, 19, we have to continue current extinctions for 20 years to return to EUC University. Why would the world be inhospitable if it was the first species in the EUC who were less numerous than humans and less capable of rational response? Humanity will make adjustments. So the statutes are vague and often don't have a purpose section. Means that they can't access all statutes under one active canon. One case doesn't spill over stuff. 15. Prior decisions provide non-binding guidance to the recent study of the courts review escort to distinguish precedent from canons applied episodically and reflect policies rather than rules. And no justice is following an in a consistent way. Treatment will extend to other interpretive method because statutory interpretation is not C plus central to start decisive. This is a web of consideration different ways rather than hierarchical rules. Courts will not let methodological constraints lead them and to make a decision. No administrative impact it structurally fails to move. 16. Unconstrained lawmaking and ability to delegate to agencies produces too much law. The administrative state politicized areas better left to market subject to performance and domestic regulatory policies. Consistent with more fair results from public monopoly and doing more things that can be done well. But executive government, otherwise stability and predictability. Administrative law is expansion is unpredictable. Uncertainty or enemies of investment. Ultimate environmental regulations replete with new applications of old rules. Extend permanent lawmaking creates the for firms to become insiders. No one challenges patent rights anymore. GCT. Means the 981 infringement cases were filed. The lowest total may be appropriate to view patent lawsuits filed. Filing is a new normal. No emerging tech impacts gradualism and hype. So sure. 18. History counsel against alarmism tech did not live up to promise and now have countervailing effects and temper consequences. Few reshape conflict innovations that amount to incremental some disputed despite a high point. Tech take that is used to exaggerate effects. Tech today's tech have under some conditions stabilize. The fact is immediate effects of geography, material, power, domestic politics.
No.
Yeah.
Can you work finding some too?
Yeah.
Let's see.
You can
There was the same more stuff on the patents.
First bench. Local species decline are an existential. Also, 19 local reductions of species that are not existential. There's little biodiversity even declining because elsewhere replace loss of scientists are growing skeptics of the leaking biodiversity loss to experts for humans. If all biodiversity disappeared, civilization would end. But now, one forecast loss of all global biodiversity have one not existential empirically died in the process of gradual hands. 18. 96% of the general and 7% of vertebrate vanished life is adaptable. Thousands to make it through the part of Triassic extinction, tipping point 5, even all what Earth will collapse and have globally or locally the planet. They collapse after the Triassic one. Happen on demand damage is gradual, not us and ecosystem slowly degrade, but never fail. If the 60% not should collapse.
On the patent stuff, be like cord plug makes it inevitable.
Yeah, on the patent stuff, cord clog due to COVID and other causes make it inevitable
There's no
because
exception
courts
for
can't
that.
get to those cases, which means it doesn't matter how they
Innovation
do
rules
it.
if they don't get there. And innovation.
Yeah, innovation is.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm just not those cards.
Oh, yeah.
Forgot about that. Okay, it's on.
Yeah, perfect. Alright, you good?
Yep.
Status of everything,
Status quo is always an option.
can you kick blanks?
We can kick the second plank on the advantage counter plan.
Just the second one?
Yeah,
Or
like the second plank is like, the second plank is like distinct from the other two planks.
The one that like incentivizes producers?
Yeah.
Okay. The plank that broadly says courts have to defer to the purpose of a statute, why would this not cause the plan?
Because it doesn't do the Clean Water Act, it explicitly says unless that statute is Clean
Yeah.
Water Act, which means that it doesn't do the plan because it doesn't say that they can.
Oh, okay, so the part that says unless,
Yeah, also the counter plan prohibits regulation on CAFOs, so can't do the plan.
oh, okay, I see, okay, sure. How does one certify that farmers are like meeting the conditions to get the subsidy without a permit?
The same way they enforce regulations, farmers they have to submit themselves to investigation by agencies like the EPA.
Yeah, we've read a bunch of cards that that is literally just what a permit is. We've read evidence that like the federal government has been banned from doing this. I guess
Well, I'm lost. What's the question?
requiring farmers to submit proof of doing various things in order to receive money. That is like quite literally how a permit works. Courts have struck down EPA attempts to gather.
So two things. First of all, if you're going to enforce regulation through the CWA, you would have to use the exact same enforcement mechanisms that the
Well,
county.
yeah, but the difference is we fiat a change in how the courts interpret the Clean Water Act to stop.
That doesn't change enforcement, which is what your question is about. That changes the interpretation of the law, not how the EPA is able to determine whether the
Also, like,
farms
it's
are
definitely not how
compliant.
permitting is also not about subsidies.
Yeah,
Permitting is about whether they're able
entirely
to permit
different
and do the
things.
practices.
Sure.
So-
Net benefits to the advantage counter plan.
The business conference, Jeannie probably.
Business confidence, federalism, stare decisis.
Why is stare
Business
decisis?
confidence, federalism, not stare
Okay.
decisis.
Why is federalism net benefit?
Because it doesn't rule in the CWA, our cards are very specific to environmental federalism, the wedded card is about ruling on the CWA and like the federal government taking more power over the environment, which is what our cards are.
Sure. Bargain card on this con, this is just like regulations are bad, it's not even about environmental regulations. Why does, I don't know, like anything the government has ever done, not them?
Sure, we'll make, there's a distinction between minute regulation changes and kind of the AF, which is just
The
fundamentally
federal
changing
government,
how
like-
agriculture is regulated in the
The
United States.
federal government, like all of its agencies combined, promulgate a new binding regulation like every other week. Like we were
Yes,
talking about.
and there's a distinction between those regulations that change things on the margins and the AF, which changes how
Well, I mean, you
5% of the US economy is
You
regulated.
wrote a link card that's not about that, so it seems like the.
So if you're asking for a more specific card, I guess that will be in the block.
Well, I mean, you've read a card, like even if you read cards that the act is sufficient to cause that, you've also read a card that says any regulation ever is also.
That's not what Barkin says. It says that businesses don't like regulation and that they react to that, but that does not mean that they
Sure.
do every regulation.
We'll run some prep. Are we doing 8 or 10?
Changed every round.
Whatever the hell you want.
What do y'all want to do?
10.
10's fine.
Okay, 10 starting.
I thought you wanted to.
Okay, stop her. 846. I wonder if that does somewhere.
Yeah.
Whiteboard.
Whiteboard's on the center, yeah.
That's true.
Paper. Use this one.
Oh, wait, hold on. I forgot to include this side. Okay, 846 starting now.
What do you ever about to draw?
Start decisive stuff.
Oh. That would be unfortunate.
You need to make the decision here.
That's true.
Yes.
For all of that.
Yeah.
Lunch can only come too soon.
830. Come on, stop that. That wasn't even good. Everyone good for an order in the meanwhile.
There's the backup on
Oh.
I'm good on there.
Yeah. The order is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, the anarchy K, the advantage counterplan, the states counterplan, the stare decisis, decisis decide, decisive, okay. The discon decide, the EPA decide, the federalism decide.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna need that.
Yeah, advantage 1, advantage 2, the anarchy K, the advantage counterplan, the states counterplan, the stare decisis decide, the BizCon decide, the EPA decide, the federalism decide. Okay. Anyone not good? Cool. Runoff from capitalism, master drives massive hydrogen include local Mexico regulation, prevent collapse of mass ocean ecosystems, enforce innovation booms that's key to solving imminent collapse of the ag industry, both cause extinction. The first argument of imports doesn't raise cost of production. The ag scenario that says internalizing cost causes innovation that resolves this. All causes don't matter. The Finney card says that they that capitalism make up to 60% of all the pollution that goes to dead zones is necessary. It's sufficient and reverse causal dead zones. All causes don't matter. Yeah, so the stuff above nitrogen, phosphorus, and food wars defense. Yes, food wars, food exports, self-terror, hotspots, mass production wars, non-authoritarian regimes that all cause nuclear war. Negative evidence doesn't do massive cascades from to collapse of U.S. ag in terms of studies confirm it. That's Kaslovsky's evidence. Argument about America, it's being insufficient is about food aid, but also a huge chunk of the global ag market disappearing is probably bad, even if America does not constitute the entirety of the ag market. The body defense is wrong. It does not assume the internally dead zones take away oxygen, which means that damage isn't gradual. Advantage 2.
Only rewriting the decision per produce instead of person that raised protectionism is Goldilocks prevents conservative interference with the admin state and environment statutes while solving paths to preserving certainty and emerging tech emerging tech. The environment defense is wrong again, but it's about the biodefense, chemicals, warming, and phosphorus, etc. are all other things that the Clemens card isolates as things that cause extinction. The no spillover stuff is fine. All our empires are premised off of things with preamble, so it doesn't matter if there is no enacted purposes in a statute. The stuff about doesn't spill over, yes, spill over. The staff card says that enacted purposes would be binding. The admin state fails card is about unregulated agencies. Optimal ossification scenario proves that the plan is Goldilocks and it does not let agencies do whatever they want. The patents answer doesn't matter because people can't even file for patents in the first place. It's not about people suing other people. The court law stuff is wrong. COVID has been resolved. COVID has been resolved. Things like Zoom and tech solved. But if you want to dispute us on this, read cards and we'll answer them. The emerging tech defense is wrong answers, the wrong impact. It's not that emerging tech is dangerous. Rather, it is good, but industry won't take off and exist without good regulations. And anarchy came. Framework, whether plan versus competitive opportunity cost plan focus debate guarantees outground shifting a question that nobody works the way the game for the negative and kills clash the thing with the entirety. They want to see perm to both perm abolish the state after doing the plan. In case they decide anarchy means no farms or government or which can cause extinction. No link to card just says the government sometimes has bad water production. That's not the app. The all fails 3 reasons. First, that other nations face villain obviously, or they have to fiat abolishing every government, which is mass movement international fiat. That's a voter. Second, the movement fail. The government is tanks and would win the war. Third, the movement fiat is battle as an active fiat world peace. The advantage counterpoint. Perm do both. Perm do the first is perm do the second is perm do the counterpoint. Third is perm do the plan, and the second and third planks. Fourth is links and benefit. Massive environmental rights treaty link the incentives. Subsidies plank is wrong. Perm do both the perm do both shield because incentives cover perm just the plan in the first one. Shield because the incentives cover the cost of regulation. Shield to link doesn't solve the first second advantage. First is compliance. Permitting is the only way to monitor compliance is McLaren and otherwise companies shoot growth style enforcement depends on self-reporting system capitalism and when it applies self-reporting couple of low force action may incentivize industry save money evading regulation for self-reporting creating this is enforcement income information real law system self-reporting polluting capitals and evade compliance already is EPE must gather income given that every person probably should consider pursuing program to enforce capitals. The incentive isn't enough and companies say no. Williams to the offering incentive is not enough. The carrot approach may be more intention for voluntary protocol sees necessary to achieve water improvements. Person depends on voluntary participation as long as changes due to inadequacies of incentives, market card at inadequacies of incentives, and cause industry capture and state opt out. Williams to financial assistance programs are voluntary, no provision made for programs. Those do not elect participate students are not available. States continue funding for state programs. Failure to make approval plans. Plus, it hears that one push countries from federal agencies do not be able to hold their own without the influence of directing involvement or at least the possibility of litigation. To distinguish plank stalls, it doesn't stop president leaving after the carve out gutsy after the president rubber keeping on producer case for the most egregious example of modern habitual that's allowed. Anything is that's Brown and 15. Pork producers court imposed far greater consequence by citing person only techniques related study case was distinguished differentiating the regulation discharge which is allowable banning construction which are beyond APA authority the case are principally distinguishable on the list corporate diseases advantages if you apply permanent requirements on the COA after protect water on a greater degradation significantly undercut permanent requirements not being limited until after discharges already occurring or producers established on favorable present because of participating related on related precedent and proper application Chevron in the second look must be taken up validity.
So it links to the benefit because they said in cross-sex that the counterclaim would involve like monitoring compliance measures.
Certainly links to net benefit because they said in cross-sex that it would like cause monitoring or like end result and means
just go to the next thing.
Okay, yeah. Just take it. First is perm to both creates a giant constituency, so no first is perm to the second is perm to the chemical and legal dictionary 16 to recommend in the states. Third is 50 state fiat is the legitimate excuse research because no literature assumes uniform fiat the force debate from literature makes it impossible. Fourth is captured deficit state agencies are much more captured by AGMA than the EPA, which cuts enforcement interstate coordination is impossible. Williams to direct regulation of pollution necessary states have been reluctant to impose controls on pollution for a variety of reasons, including global power, agriculture interests at the state level pollution. In case interstate waters contribute to downstream deterioration coordination, incentives regular lacking minimal federal requirements obviate these difficulties and obviously can't solve advantage can't change our professional president that leads to our courts to ban all environmental regulation, destroy the administrative state, and
Just move on.
yeah, it's sorry to say. First is unique is writing links to the plan's code is adopted interpretive approach for decades. Plan just clarifies the nature of the canon, make it binding and effective for preventing capitalism. That's the stack evidence. Second, non-unique. Dozens of other binding canons already exist and constitute the bulk of how courts determine claim construction. That's the Lemley point. Third is no versatile link. The app doesn't fiat a method of how judges push statutory construction. Rather, bounds the permissible interpretation to justice that a forbid state objectives are enacted. Attached to the statute, Stack 19, enacted purpose represents one agreement with justice purposes and commercial purposes has no object and needs to use an active purpose and being bound to the canon fully reflects form purposes captures already that adherence is meant to meaning provide the specific courts to hear bonds and active purposes not and lead the reasons why avoids takes most central and the ground for navigating an active purpose and has to purpose ensures the connecting statutes and given active purpose proceed through process statute catch up numbers reject their own common ground is not only theoretical Supreme Court justice will otherwise oppose that position have relied on stacked enacted statements of purposes and turn rule laws based on methodological consistency. Old Father 14 their point respects on which report adhering to past majority decision justification for adherence to percent center own law treating like cases like work of not applying another name for the prior adoption of single mode analysis of course the rule law tons of all causes of democracy all 20 so Trump aggressive only Trump rally democracy of all security thing. Voters are the election was by MLB legitimate voters press already writing and pushing a new round of state voting restrictions that turnout speaks up. Pennsylvania said that they plan to advance any harder vote gerrymandering, pushing major against elections they people things to Supreme Court, and their only evidence says that court should be able to restrain the administration to prevent overreach. The administration impact to that there's no scenario for extinction. Why do people go to war over courts doing something? The this on that first that this has an unique Lotus ruling from last October thumbs, but the industry is in down now. In down now. 16 APs withdrawal to do approval these farms in the house whether they're required to apply for a permit and clean water for discharge and others nature and pushing literally the appeal to prevail every large fluid they have an obligation. So that Biden thumbs there are tons of environmental regulation out there is that the absolute better we control uniqueness next water pollution wrecks every other sector. 2021 water pollution increases expense of the rest of the U.S. Implication business implication where we're responsible for expenses caused by water pollution such as healthcare cost filtration and many others are increasing use the financial benefits of water drop into our zone and massively and also like all of the ag scenario is like a turn to this because it's talking about like increasing ag competitiveness and efficiency. No link, no word for why the capo industry is key to the economy and tons of numbers to impact Ukraine, Omicron, inflation, etc., etc. The EPA just said first is that permits that say going after the capos that permits first the EPA to pursue endless fact finding missions with drains, resources, burning less expensive investment layer, and second is the civil suits and large enforcement action pursuant to CUU and ensure enormous financial and political pressure grows slow. To provide compliance, EPA should pursue, EPA should gather information and bring about civil and administrative action. EPA does not know how many cases in the U.S. Gather information, EPA will determine what's administrative, enforcement compliance after collecting information. EPA can pursue comprehensive search and bring substantial case carrying safety firms for companies that won't suffer resounding effects. Pressure arrest and industry or something still on state do not bring person action and get here. Those that won't trade off. They're correct. Their impacts is top the EPA agenda. They cut something out. There are tons of other priorities, methane regulation, billions in water infrastructure, NEPA, etc., and no trade off. The fact that the EPA has multiple functional programs disproves a zero-sum budget. That federalism is that first that Biden's EPA already erode federalism or proves its resilience. In 2021. Trump focused on EPA embracing corporate federalism 2018-2022 strategic plan with corporate federalism enforcement across the states resulting in declining number of federal enforcement. Biden EPA will take a more aggressive position, mark the card at position. Second is that there are tons of numbers. CPP, COVID, Trump sanctuary city crackdown, all thumb approved. No link. Third is that the Lotus ruling from last October thumbs that was done about. So does Maui. That was from 2020 and no link or uniqueness. NPDS permitting regimes have existed and been constantly actively enforced by the CRA since over 50 years ago. Planters reversed to a pre-port producers interpretation and no links. WA is federalist. Most 19 corporate cars part of regulations, water rights, farmers culture, determination, waters from elsewhere. Fulfill clean water agencies must fulfill effects of commerce laws. Authorities, the order of substance article in Congress is necessary vital component of commercial activity. Water regulation by the federal government is beyond question. Impact is not external.
Where did the
Yes. Oh, we have the taking place.
Cool. Stop roads. 48. Let me find somewhere to write that down.
I wrote down 8:30.
Okay, good for process.
Yep.
Okay, there are many other dead zones in the world, some 7 times bigger than the one in the Gulf of Mexico. Why is the Gulf of Mexico unique?
I think the LSU card says that the Gulf of Mexico is the only one that is like rapidly expanding. That's why it's like the one we need to stop for like extinction.
It says that it's the only dead zone that's expanding.
Well, it says like this one is rapidly
Okay, that's
expanding the
fine.
fastest and expanding because of these farms.
The second advantage, your first environmental impact, chemicals, warming, phosphorus, the ones you've outlined. Is your argument that current regulations will solve those problems?
Well, we think that like buying enacted, it's first 2 parts. First is that in the status quo, hypertextualist precedent will lead to like conservative judiciaries, like kind of hijacking things like CWA, CAA, etc., and like removing all regulations ever. Second is that if there was an enacted purposes canon, it would force like status quo regulations to become like stronger because they would have to actually listen to
The
these
patent
things.
scenario,
preambles.
what's it like? Can you just explain what the scenario is here?
Like the terminal impact or the internal link?
Can you tell me?
Yeah, so the Lemley card talks about how like right now the Federal Circuit ignores kind of the preamble, i.e. the enacted purpose of like patents. Like the plan's enacted purposes canon would force them to listen to the preamble. Like the Lemley card is like super
So,
specific
wait.
to the idea of why preamble / listening to the enacted purpose is key to like patents like existing basically.
Yeah, I'm lost between the preamble and key to enacted purpose, or key to.
The enacted purpose is the
Yeah,
preamble is
I-
the enacted purpose.
What is the connection between the preamble and its key to patent innovation?
Well, yeah, so the Lemley card says that right now, like Federal Circuit Courts uses a bunch of like different things to determine like to determine claim construction of patents. But the exception to that is that they cannot apply any of these things to like
Okay.
the preamble because
That's
the
fine.
preamble is like this unique thing.
What were
that's-
the reasons to reject the team? Just to be clear.
I think it was, so on the state's counter plan, it was just the stuff about 50 state fiat, and on the K, it was like movement fiat and like utopia fiat.
Okay, let's go to the incentives counter plan block. What was the perm you read?
It was just like, it wasn't a new perm, but it's just like, or actually, sorry, it wasn't new perm. It was perm and then just the subsidies plank, and it's like shields because like incentives, like giving them a ton of money would cover like the cost of regulation.
Okay, that's
Would,
fine.
like, yeah.
The state's counter plan, the capture deficit, if we win, that the USFG is also captured by the agriculture industry, do we win a presumption ballot?
I mean, like, that's just a circumvention argument. We'll, like,
Right, exactly.
defend that the EPA isn't, like, that the EPA solves.
So so your argument is that the EPA is not captured by industry. If we win that it is that a presumption ballot?
Well, if you win that, that would take out the first advantage, but not the second one, and we have, like, we'll beat that argument.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
948.
Case also says federal agencies might It's a duty.
I believe that's been stated before, yeah. That's all I see with next to this. Exact. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Just,
That's not this.
no, I'm trying to chiller, no. Just, wild tangle of curly hair zooming by, that's it.
should be sent. Let me know everyone's concern order. While it comes out. Span. Yeah, give me one second. Everyone for order. Yeah, cool. The advantage counterplan. The states counterplan. The anarchy K. Advantage 1. Advantage 2.
Give me one.
Just let me pick it.
I need to find my. Okay, I should be good. Actually, no, I'm good. Sorry.
Alright. Anyone not ready? The counterplan is also 100% of the case. It has it's also the second advantage because it has the court's rule. It has the court's rule that they have an enacted purpose, which allows them to interpret the statutes that the second advantage talks about while avoiding the CWA, which doesn't link to net benefit. We're kicking plank 2, which takes out the perms and all of the solvency deficits about incentives, but it also takes out links to net benefit. It doesn't link to net benefit because we aren't going for it. But just if they went per links to net benefit, it's a logical debate after the advocate action in fear to the status quo and efficiency framing it. Net benefit always unimpacted solvency deficits. I'll go through the stuff now. They say permanently the counterplan. Do the counterplan separate voter for fairness. Protection is by regulations at home. 10 protect for personal regulation of activities. Protect students and policies relating to protection. That means a binding legal rule by any branch of the government or by 16 regulation of legal rule that influences intervention by any legislative executive or judicial body that has the power to create a binding legal norm. Terms predictability protection is not merely intended to protect vandal 10 instead of binding graded definition. The definition of protecting the law impacts so long as the tips were made a loop of found definition of protection and properly imported attempts to protect or intents of protecting the end of the definition of the definition based on definition of protect the and then it would be a mistake to announce with your interpretation of protecting independently the counterplan increases protection by prohibiting all regulation with McGuffey. The most precise interpretation means increases must have more protection than before McGuffey. 20 ambiguity leaves CBA in short of deciding how increase will occur instead of finding increase DPA regulation plus these are not on the whole why will you recognize that there were lots of ways to interpret increase or rejected that increases should be ignored. Any other interpretation is a disaster first like uniqueness illegal suggestions about water resources happen all the time, but the government has a problem again. Single binding rule in the past year, and second, if it's an audit counterplan, it's an app, the infinite possibilities, guidance, documentation, and tax incentives, a lot of ways to link on anything in spam. Tiny asset defend nothing. The perm to both it's mutually exclusive because the CB prohibits regulation. That's plank 1. Perm to the second perm with 2 planks, it links to that benefits because it has larger government involvement and increases federal authority. It would reject the perms without that benefits. Teaches both teams cost benefit analysis, so they're the only portable skill worst case rejecting the counterplan, but there's no shielding and increases federal authority, which links to the federalism, decided increased regulation, which links to the other it doesn't link to net benefit because it doesn't increase authority because it doesn't increase federal authority. The incident stuff it doesn't matter because we aren't going to go for that plank. The precedent stuff it doesn't assume fiat. We force them to have an active candidate, which means that they have to go for it. Read the counterplan text that says that they will. The purpose of that they have to do that. If they don't win spillover, if they win that there's no spillover, then it applies to the case, which means that they don't get the advantage. The links to net benefit because there's monitoring. We kick that plank. The state's counterplan will consider perm test competition means any theories like the argument not seeing the anarchy counterplan or the anarchy case. State is violence in the species. First interstate war without states. Wars would not escalate because they would not go interstate. States are inherently authoritarian. Their survival instincts make them wage war. Second, secret catastrophe. The capitalism doesn't inherently control the planet, but when current regulators are captured by industry, the rights source would be for market failure. They say for market. The interpretation, the violent and just state justifications of the one see outweigh the material consequences of enactment. The impact of this isn't close supporting the state in any capacity brainwashes the next generation of thought leaders who monopolize violence in the hands of policymaking view debate train students that not research when the ability to succinctly and persistently deliver points prior to states cause extinction, so you should punish students who supported extinction to outweigh squash the fair rule Only our offense asshole, everyone AC card choose the focus of the debating against infinite department is week first and last day. If they can't even win weighing all their cases, they're debating badly, ignoring whoever I'm just ignoring hate speech. Outweighs plan focus is worse, reduces the name in advocacy to it, 12 second blend. Never outweighs after the topic is not biased, knowing the DSA committee says the team means nothing and right back regulatory gymnastics doesn't help in politics, is house clashing and attack high school's no research, just reading back class with coaches and more better for creative debating on the feet, at the very least, reject all permutations and assume all solvency. There's no alternative thinking aside from the ability to anarchy to even enter debates and letting turns class, they say with a pen, we agree, you have to weigh it firstly. Our framework doesn't move their offense, it's just a structure why our offense on weights. They have to tell to explain why discussing the F concept is more important than anarchists and the perm do both is incoherent because you can't invoke water protection from a state that doesn't exist. If the perm results of protection are no longer being increased, it's voting issue for suffrage, making the F moving target and dimensioning testing. If the perm has a delay element like the second perm, that's intrinsic allowing the F to fill out a new add-ons as a voting issue. Perm must be topical, otherwise it's not moving the resolution correctly, which means they don't need the F word increase with beyond that. It would take a 91 the court held the term increase for the increase all perms the all requires repealing all statutes, court decisions, and agency regulations. That means that after repealed in the perm which suffers a durable fiat voting issue D. And I already read the protection definitions, which means that the other perm answered above the case. The cases they said the 6 states good. First, a case turned doesn't 6 states are good, but societies good. Societies reorganize along cooperative and nonviolent lines. Threshold for impact turn is a state keep warrant, but our advocacy solves it. The alternative solves it. The alternative feels against the governments globally. Instead, people cooperate over water resource and global problems, which solves the advantage. Their only answer is theory, or that we don't get mass movement fiat. But it's a debate about competing interpretation of competing models, and our model is much better at solving extinction. We get mass movement fiat to question the affirmative. That's our interpretation. First is a framework question. If you think status violence is bad, then you should allow us to fiat an alternative. Second is an question. The topic is biased staff, which means you should correct negative and allow the negative and multiple options to negate the affirmative. Third, info processing. It forces the 2AC to make smart arguments. It forces us to caution they get to fiat mass movements within the government, which means we should be able to fiat mass movements outside. It turns the anarchism check. There's plenty of arguments why anarchism is bad. You can just read them in. However, reject the argument not the team judges can't set individual norms. You can't change the way the debate has already happened, which means that you shouldn't vote us down for theory argument. The ag advantage. Dead zones don't cause extinction and are non-anthropogenic. Absolves it. That's the word they said. The Gulf is the largest, but Arabian dead zone is 7 times larger. For 18 Mexico dead zones, 8,776 square miles. Arabian is 7 times larger. And that answers the dead zone because they just said that 60 that's much larger, but it doesn't matter if the Arabian Sea is larger. But the local losses also don't cause extinction. They say it takes away oxygen, but those collapses in the food chain don't spill over to other things. That's 2 pieces of house evidence, which is like empirical data that says that those losses of ecosystems don't spill over to other areas. The food war stuff is brain dead. First numbers, COVID, climate and conflict blocking, long-term food insecurity, WB, 20 countries say food insecurity reversing gains are due to conflict and national security. COVID continue through 2022 and beyond. Still known as red impacts 30% higher risk at the country level. Second, no food wars. Impacts ignore the best research and basic reasoning. Wars costing no correlation, and even as local skirmishes rise great cars don't join the fray. That's Salihan. Their only response is that it causes massive cascades to other countries, but those countries aren't able to fight because they don't have the capacity for it. Castle is unreadable. He's a food company CEO, and despite being creatively highlighted, the court's best lines don't come close to great power work. Their fourth is export locations. America only supplies 9.5% of agricultural supply. Most produce goes to wealthy countries who won't go to war. The U.S. only makes up 2% of the export of the imports of undernourished countries who are the most vulnerable. Within their tax hospital, that's striking here. They just said it's about 8. Yeah, it doesn't go to the countries that their impacts talk about. The court advantage. There's no spillover. Judges would ignore the applicants. They'll treat it like handed rather than precedent. No one on the Supreme Court follows doctrine in a coherent way. Enforcing it with a vague context is a joke. They said, and then they just said that it's binding, but they don't do it. They'll sneakily ignore the access wiki. 15 if judges can implement animals of interpretation they wouldn't because that method is a kind of judicial reasoning, particularly cases courts regarding ignoring provisions because they would develop to reach a system with which they disagree when the courts believe their interpretation provide constitutional principles and caught up in interpretive wars. Access wiki. 15 Lima is skeptical, methodological, consistent, will emerge from the court for street methodologies ordinary lawmaking. He misguided because of the stakes of interpretive wars for the judges who are committed to a particular method and leads to strike down wiki. 15 on the constitutional authority must judges believe codified rules would conflict with their just power, and if Jewish came to shove, they would hold binding rules unconstitutional, which means that they don't access the stuff, the biodiversity stuff I did above, and the other stuff is taken out by the fact that it doesn't spill over to other cases and those other statutes that they need to access for the other cases. I'm good for the rest of it.
Okay. Let's talk about the K, the stuff that or let's just clarify really quickly the framework interpret about having to justify the at first. Can this become a floating pick in the
No, we think states are bad, so they probably shouldn't do anything because we say
Okay.
that they should not
To
exist.
be clear, does the alternative fiat movements try to abolish the state, or is it fiat the states dissolve themselves?
Yes, that states dissolve themselves.
Which governments? Like all of them?
Just the governments, man.
So you fiat every government on earth?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so let's talk about the cases at DISAD. The argument here was that the threshold for an impact turn is a state key warrant. We have read a second advantage about the administrative state being good. Why is that not a state key warrant?
Yeah, sure. I guess like that's about the administrative state needing to regulate certain industries. Our the card we read in the one in C talks about how anarchist collectives would solve that because we work on cooperative lines and not conflictual lines, which means we don't have incentives to escalation.
Okay, so like for example, the card talks about like things like terrorism, like disease. Would you just like anarchists would just come together and like say no more terrorism?
Well, like disease, we work cooperatively to solve that impact. That's what the AF evidence talks about. The terror impact, people are less incentivized when there's no government. But also the AF card talks about how there's no incentive to escalate because those states don't exist to cause that escalation. So even if there's terror attacks, it doesn't escalate to the extent that it happens in like a world of states.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. The let's talk about the counterplan really quickly. The stuff about just like applying it at large, we've read impacts to like COQA. Like, why does that solve those?
You've read impacts.
I think,
Well,
like the Clemens card is like environmental statutes.
yeah. The House Set evidence answers that, but also like
Okay, so
just broadly like the House Set evidence is defense to that.
okay, so sure, so it doesn't solve that. The 2AC McLaren card talks about how like leaving the app as a carve out means that like courts would like it would be non-binding because like courts would not have precedent. Like, why does the counterplan solve that?
Well, yeah, the counterplan solves that by saying that they have to interpret it in a like what's it called? Yeah, the purpose of the statute informs it. Like that's the way the court interprets the statutes now. Like we feel that that's the way the court interprets the statutes now.
Sure, that's fine, I guess. The ag advantage really quickly, or yeah, let's talk about the first advantage really quickly.
Yeah.
The arguments about like dead zones don't cause extinction. Like we've read evidence that like the Arabian or like the Gulf dead zone is the only one that's increasing. Like, why does the Arabian dead zone cause extinction?
Because it's the large. Well, we don't think dead zones cause extinction because of the House Set evidence.
Sure.
But like the Boric evidence talks about how like the Arabian Sea is much larger, which means that the deoxidization that's happening there is a much bigger impact. I'm sitting out. It's the order would be the EPA DISAD, the BISCON DISAD, the Stare Decisis DISAD, and the Fidelity DISAD.
Pick it up one more time.
Yes. EPA, BISCON, Stare Decisis, Fidelity.
Can they download the doc?
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right.
On the EPA side, can see there's no trade-off that takes out any offense because it means the EPA will always prioritize the environmental regulations that our impact was about, which means they can't access uniquely offense. The BISCON DISAD all can see that Ukraine thumbs the impact, which takes out any offense because it proves that the decline is inevitable as a result of the Russian sanctions, which also takes out the case because transition does not happen if farms do not have the necessary investment and confidence to invest in the transition. The Stare Decisis DISAD all can see that ultimately the all causes democracy takes out any impact, and I'll also concede that if, or that the no link argument, if they don't feel a change in methodology, they can't solve because conservative judges will just find ways to strike down regulations within the bounds that they set. This distinction that they've drawn to get out of the stare decisis set also takes out their advantage. Federalism set. Warming outweighs magnitude and makes extinction inevitable through world single rise destruction of oceans and forests and non-linear cascading environmental effects that try to die from 14 points make it irreversible outweighs the war trillion times based on future generations. That's annually extinction in time sex. So we consider climate during the extinction before is unlikely to cause extinction with firepower would be suicide extinction would only be possible on this threats were prevented such as climate change. Warming turns the case exacerbates every environmental impact drowsing impossible forces more use of pesticides and widespread food shortages that turns second advantage because runaway will be distracting innovation from things like patents and emerging tech. The turns case doesn't go the other way. Federal state cooperation is necessary for the federal government's regulations to matter at all because the states can enforce that. But state regulation can solve absent the federal government, which means we only access turns case link. Turns case when it says decentralization results in environmental mismanagement and water pollution also destroys the local expertise necessary to effectively manage water costs. The environment broadly right. 15 managing water pollution require different set of local expertise and total diversion strategies about decisions without local expertise. Protein serious environmental carbon applying and inappropriate strategy in soil and water resource with enormous consequences. Federalism is balanced. State cooperation and empowerment is increasing, but it's tenuous, so link threshold flow. That's what they have evidence. Student one is wrong. Biden has restored past water and environmental regulations, but avoided uniquely state issues like a non-point source pollution. Now, the second thought is not about environmental federalism, which is what our impact series is about, but it's also not instances where the federal government expanded its authority uniquely and in a way that will be long-term. The WOTUS and Maui's decisions do not stop. WOTUS reduced federal intervention, and Maui preserved existing law and did not expand authority. The Treaty evidence that they did not read, but I'll quote it anyway, describe the case as measured and preserving jurisdictional reach. Federalism's broadly been revitalized. Kuniski, different states rely upon cooperative federalism. This coalition goes to this cooperative and valuable speed federalism. American federalism with system polarization with very leaders such as polarization code. Rich trusted extremists require unified all states strong by press for pandemics. Yes, so as the federal responsibility governments picked up slack. We're going for good federalism demonstrated. Should power by cabinet nomination. Actually, no, with this one. Corporate federalism is solo left now across the range. Policy areas in but states have the freedom to make policy, reduce water pollution, federal federalism, national standards and life. States, the states are responding to a failure to enact climate legislation by passing laws. State also prominent in health policy. You have the ACA court, health for Medicaid states have choice. The link debate. The plan oversets federal authority ruling. The balance of federalism. That's the 1 and 7. There are no link arguments scripted. They're essentially the same. It's a question of how the jurisdiction is being applied, and the app expands the federal government's reach under the CWA, which means that it causes state backlash. And it's not just because the authority could hypothetically exist now does not mean that the link is stopped. Water is a state responsibility. Federal intervention causes backlash. Otherwise, cooperative state-federal working relationships. 116. Water is a local EFG on the state out or has no reason for federal laws have been designed to avoid preemption of error of federal overseers leading on states to secure federal goals. Federal involvement may be the federal assumption of state environmental authorities is the nuclear option destroys state federal cooperation member. 1. Environmental governance is shared between the state and EPA. All states table codes of greatest solution to national problems allows economic scale. EPA pushes the national consistency side for EPA to video permits for activity states allow such as the dredging of wetland. EPA brings on enforcement. The nuclear option EPA takes back authorities such as rare few regulated with deal with state federal authority. WPA to power from EPA wastewater treatment and gave that to the states. Every administration work with states relationship results in federalism. CAFO discharges into non-navigable water scope that offensive state Congress. Colby 13. CAFOs are not point source. Decision with the EPA's governments of CAFOs. There must be actual discharge navigable water to trigger authority. Federal regulation CAFOs is minimal. Legal for states to devise their regulations. Are you sure? No. Federal difference in state non-point source polluting regulations vital to overall cooperative framework in the situation. 18. Congress for protecting responsibility and rights of states. The Act leaves the states to regulate and point towards these limitations. Bear witness to the cooperative physical refers to values which one level does have authority, but recognize policies would be better by inviting other levels. Congress allows states to significant law in areas where federal overall was expressed effective. Congress chooses to differ even more. And non-point source pollution, non-point source control requires land use regulation, which is uniquely same responsibility. Shift 18. Non-point source pollution controlled in the states. Congress organized federal listen for allowing federal there's no way at all in the land use control which can intercept the non-point source, but I think it's non-point source principle of land usage false within states domain and interpretation that results in such pollution being shifted to direct federal control would conflict with the law. I conceded. Publish that. Sorry. I don't know.
Wait a second. Okay, April.
I thought you unplugged this laptop after you said it. So actually,
No, I haven't.
4 minutes. Send out the cards. I think I have over 30 Word docs open.
Are you bragging or?
No, that was not a good thing. I just need to find this document. There we go.
I almost had it. 25.
Amateur numbers.
Yeah. I'm slacking.
Did you have a K debate? So it wasn't that many.
Oh no, I closed all this ones. This is just for this debate.
I'm pretty sure that it's. I'm deathly afraid of sending out like a wrong file.
Just go ahead and send us.
No, that is
Oh,
the right file.
Yeah, send us the blocks.
Well, no, I sent analytics. Like I'm not a coward.
No, I
So
mean,
have
I meant like the whole thing.
Okay, should be sent. First advantage, second advantage, advantage counterplan, abolition counterplan, sorry, the critique, BizCon DA, federalism DA.
I'm sorry, I was opening the doc.
Yeah. Advantage 1, advantage 2, the advantage counterplan, I guess just distinguished counterplan now, but the abolish the state counterplan, BizCon DA, federalism DA.
Hey, don't laugh, in my day it was.
Cato unironically extended the abolish the government counterplan against us for 8 minutes of the 2NC. Cato last year.
Cool, super.
This is totally not that. This is totally different. Like, come on.
No, the block was the abolish the government.
World government.
This one's a K. This one's a K. Like, we put K before it.
The
Like,
block
what are you
was
talking
the
about?
block was the abolish the government counterplan and death cult. And dropped the app. It was just like, I don't know. They're very good at debate, but just that block was like. Okay, everybody good?
It is anthropocentric and there's no urgency. All cause the LCO says that even if it is not the largest, that it is the one that's growing the fastest and it's the most key biodiversity, so it's the only one sufficient to cause extinction. Yes, impact the whole set emphasis not about the oceans. Our internal links subsumes it because even if historically biodiversity decline has been slow, our internal links says that the possible oxygen collapse in the ocean, which would overwhelm defense and adaptability. There's no good with number homes. One of the problems we short of the river grows with its disturbance. Adaptive export system came back like it didn't break it, but it did plunge. Yes, impact of meteorites about historical collapses. That is wrong. Our doesn't assume our internal which is about total collapse with use agriculture, which means the empirical arguments are wrong. Yes, draw references that the clock references the great powers of interest in the region. Yes, hungry people can't fight Arabs during the air exports or key this emphasis about U.S. food aid, not something that is sold through markets. The second advantage. Yes, Bill, all of your cards are not about our mechanism. All of your cards are not about our mechanism. They're about when justices have the ability to choose interpretive methods to make a ruling on. Does not matter because the text of the plan feels that they use the method. The text of the plan feels they use purposes as the method. So it means what Bill over be starting to test their evidence and all of the things and striking arguments about allowing justices to choose what method they use when interpreting cases. The feels that they choose this method and that precedent would be forced to spill over because the starting tests are hyper specific, yours is generic, and not about our mechanism. The second, the advantage counterplan. Distinguishing does not solve the fact that you force people to feel it does not solve our certainty. Argument certainty is key to all of our impacts, including things like patents and emerging technology. The kind of would be an insane carve out because it would leave the single biggest example of protectionism in place. Because even if you do apply the factors in other areas, it does not solve certainty, which is key to the it doesn't solve factors in both problems with the current doctrines. Fuzzy 16. The future is the question will be the more various news of the culture challenges and social religious regimes.
I never started my timer.
320.
Okay, thank you. I was at the legislative regimes.
Calling the question how much creating parentheses represents the issue over the relevant validation of the contingency, relevant to the reading is something your ability to declare this back for 90 from the person not is proposed one is failure to complete shortly, or comes with presence with acknowledged directions of the court, and same uncertainty results generating element of knowledge the justification of the control, conservation PC, that agrees the problem the not solved. Proceed. You do not have an extinction impact. The one NC card is 2 lines long. It says that sometimes the government calls water shortages. It calls water shortages not external because the act solves it. It's not the extinction framework. When the case against the competitive alternative, anything else destroys fairness, but anything else destroys fairness because they prove anything. No one sees badly win the debate and allows them to reset the debate and arbitrary across the question of skills fairness, which is the only intrinsic presupposed by their participation in the competitive activity. The contribution is arbitrary. The contribution is arbitrary. That was about the brainwashing argument is wrong. There's no impact to it. 17 years of external substitution that way, and you link to it as well because you break counterplans. But then the state the one to see the actual fails because you can pick out any bad assumption of when the judge stopping there and obviously checks saying slurs. The plan text is good because it's predictable. Other stuff solves negative ground. Yes, there's terminal effect. That's about permutation to the act and then abolish the government solves all the mutually exclusive arguments. Delay intrinsic is good because otherwise you get delay counterplans which are unbeatable and terrible for debate. And independently, even if you win framework, does not solve the second advantage. It's an administrative state good impact. So obviously, abolishing the state will not solve abolishing the state will not solve that. Even if you win framework, this is an impact term. To abolishing the government anarchists do not solve. There's no explanation of how they would solve things like terrorism, diseases, or collective action failures. You do not get to fiat and end to the government obviously justifies fiating world peace because you can fiat every government does something. Every government does something. And they're going to solve by going for other like states, politics, and state politics and turns into reciprocity is not because the Swiss never has to make decisions. Reciprocity is wrong. We only get to fiat one actor, not every government on earth, obviously. And the impact turn stuff was entered above. Yeah, the Biscontier. Oops, drop the straight turn. The case of conceding the economy is low now is irrelevant. You have voted the argument the ag keep the overall economy. They've conceded that the economy is low now, but the app brings it back by incentivizing innovation. In the ag sector, its drops means all of your impact defense and second measures apply. Yeah, federalism TA. None of this is external warming stuff to solve because they explicitly say they don't solve the climate evidence. They explicitly say they don't solve the climate evidence. It says that we solve warming takes all the Turner case arguments. The Turner case was wrong because even if there are key to enforcing statutes, probably not capable of specific federalism is low now. Even if you're correct that it has probably been revitalized in other issues, proof once with no spillover because if they're intervening in one area now, it proves that it would spill over to other issues. Now it was an expansion of power. This congress 20th the court and the kind of area forcing should be the decision given the century and water conflict intervention. Now this great 13 the longest strong role is a strong role water conflicts and countries. Really keeping water just for fresh water, increasing conflicts of water, the along with water in countries, and so food insecurity. This created 13 countries, plus the national food security, inability access to physical systems, and transmission affecting resources, all our and division direction countries, both fields promptly the prompting using and interest federal trust water protection and irrigation systems. No link terms of permitting programs exist now. The act applies to one more area. If they're correct, there's unique link and just proof the spill over the water happens to preemption. The act does not do that. The evidence says that shared jurisdiction is good. That's what the act does because we rely on state enforcement mechanisms to some extent via citizens whose interstate commerce argument is dumb because that is what state authority now, which and says giving states a role is key. We do that via collaborative enforcement mechanism, which is a flare evidence. Oh wait, I still have time. 4 seconds. Yeah, AF is a collaborative enforcement mechanism. That's the declaring card. Relies on states for lawsuits. Yeah.
Let me find one of the 15 flows. How much time we have?
412.
412. Start.
Which card did you read on the this ad? The one that was about there's a thumper card you read.
Yeah, I read Camacho, the Maui Thumper, first grade card, second grade card.
Okay, but you didn't read the phrasing card?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Thanks. Can you give me a second?
Yeah.
Alright. So we're gonna start, right? It's kind of long, so. Federalism. Yeah, federalism. BizCon. Yeah, there it is. Star decisis. Ag advantage. Or counter plan. K. Ag advantage. Second advantage. Yeah, I'll give it again. Federalism. BizCon. Star decisis. The counter plan. The K. Counter plan. It's really a counter plan. The ag advantage and the course advantage. This chair is kind of right. Is anyone not ready?
They've conceded that nuclear war is outweighed by a trillion times because nuclear war doesn't cause extinction. Climate change is the only impact that causes extinction. They've conceded the end times evidence which says that nuclear war doesn't cause extinction and it's unlikely because no one's going to use the firepower to cause that nuclear war. But climate change is the only one that has that certain threat. It's not a very good card. They conceded it, which means that you automatically prefer our contextualization of it to their impacts, which are all about that. But they definitely don't access the turn to warming because Turn's case only flips. Next, state cooperation with the federal government is a prerequisite to effective regulation. This has several implications. First, if the states don't cooperate with the federal government on issues like enforcement and info sharing, then none of the APS regulations matter. Wedded in Ryan says that federal environmental agencies need state agencies, local laws to effectively regulate places like farms. Second, they can't win Turn's case because absent a strong state-federal relationship, the new federal regulations on warming do not matter. Ben's only answer to the 1AR was that they're specific to a statute. First of all, no, it's definitely not. Second of all, their evidence does not speak to the question of federal-state cooperation. Third of all, it doesn't say anything about climate. It has two words that say climate change, but that doesn't give them the warrants to give them it. Read our cards that are very specific. It is game over for them on this Turn's case debate because we have two cards that say federalism as a prerequisite to the app, and they don't have a single card to answer it. Federalism is high now. I'll go to the uniqueness debate. Biden is committed to respecting state authority and avoiding drastic expansions of federal authority. The Maui card, Asher preempted it in the 1NR. It describes the ruling as measured and preserving jurisdictional reach, which means it didn't trigger the link because it wasn't an expansion of new authority. The water conflicts card doesn't say anything. Federal intervention of water allocation is not the same as federal intervention in non-point source pollution as per our F, but we have F that the Fed is committed to preserving federalism. The food security card says that it says the exact same thing. These cards just say that the Fed has to do the water allocation thing, not expand jurisdictional authority over how to protect those water resources. All of the cards that we've read are in the context of how to protect the environment and how the states have the authority to do that. I'll go to the link debate now, but we're crushing on it because they've conceded that non-point source pollution is the thing that is able to be regulated by states. The federal government stays out of water issues right now. That's the Warren evidence, which talks about how water is a local matter that's organized by the states. They've conceded that the Colby evidence, which says that CAFO discharges into non-point source pollution, which states are the only people who have the authority to regulate. So it's not about preemption. It's not about the other stuff. It's about whether they regulate CAFOs and non-point source pollution, which all of our link cards speak to. Our cards are very specific to the federal-state relationship, and their cards are just trying to draw an arbitrary distinction that isn't the same as non-point source versus point source, which our evidence draws the distinction about what CAFOs do and how the app would regulate it. The link is also about state backlash, which means that if we win, the states don't like the plan, we win the link, and we've won that they won't like the plan because it expands federal authority. The BizCon is that we conceded Ukraine as a thumper to the economy. Their turn is not about the economy being low now. Read the cards. It's about the future, that there will be shocks on the economy from ag. If Ukraine didn't take out the economy, then nothing is going to take out the economy in the future, which was the conceded argument, the 1NR, which takes out the turn. The stare decisis, they said they don't fiat it, they changed methodology. That was their no link argument on the stare decisis. They said they've conceded
they've considered that cross-application from the one in R will cross-apply it to the case, which means they don't get the first advantage because judges aren't bound by the interpretation. The counterclaim will concede the perm test competition. The K will concede the perm test competition. The theories related to inject the argument on the team that was conceded the ag advantage. They just said that the dead zone is growing and it spills over to biodiversity. Halstead is definitely about their biodiversity scenario because it talks about local losses which don't escalate because they don't spill out of the local regions and don't spill over to that area. But it's also turned by warming because it exacerbates that loss of biodiversity. But Halstead is much better. It says that there's no correlation between those things. There is the food scenario. They can't read Castle because it is a food CEO and it doesn't say anything about great power war. Read the card. It doesn't give the war. And Spot Salian is much better. It says that the countries that are most likely to go to war are not the countries that would escalate, and the countries don't have an incentive to draw in there. But our evidence also says that we don't export to the countries like the undernourished countries, which their evidence is about. It's only 2% of our exports, which means that shocks to the U.S. system does not cause instability in those regions. The court's advantage. They said it's not about their mechanisms. First, we've conceded the no link on the stare decisis dissent, which says that they don't spill over to this broader binding authority. But our evidence is very specific that even if they create binding authority over certain areas, they aren't able to prevent judges from craftily interpreting the law, which is how conservative judges will do it. Read their 1AC evidence, which talks about how conservative judges want CAFOs to do what they want and aren't going to interpret the CWA and want to interpret it in a certain way. If it's true, if that's true, then our evidence about how they'll sneakily apply textual interpretations and how they strike down laws that regulate those things means that there's no impact to this and they can't cross apply to the dissent.
I think there's 4 minutes too. Starting. No, I feel fine about that. Yeah, that's attack. And also, they dropped the cross-apply application from the EPA side about federal action and civil suits or whatever. So, I dropped the card. It's pretty. It's federal intervention. It's not. Sure, app is cooperative. We're going good for an order. Advantage 2, so like the court stuff. Advantage 1, the decide.
What was the advantages again?
The second advantage, the first advantage. And I'm going to answer the cross application just on this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Top level framing, there is just not an external impact for the negative. They dropped the patent's impact and they dropped both the patent's impact and the stuff about emerging tech regulations. Both of those solve warming. The cards are very explicit and say that both emerging tech and patents can resolve these scenarios. The 2NR explanation was all in the context of the Clement scenario, which is about CWA and implementing regulations. That's not the scenario we're going for because the patent stuff and the patent stuff and the emerging tech also obviates extinction, obviates the warming anyways. We saw the same impact, which means we only have to win some risk of some other impacts or win some risk of a deficit on the disadvantage to outweigh the going to explain the impacts here really quickly. The patent impact listed a bunch of different impacts that they didn't resolve that are not related to nuclear war, which means that the dropping of that one card does not matter. The random 16 card lists disease, environmental collapse, genetic manipulation, and AI as all scenarios that would cause extinction absent a sufficient patenting regime. The Hagarth card that I can't really pronounce also lists a bunch of scenarios. It says meteor impact, volcanic activity, cyanobacteria, soil erosion, and biodiversity loss are all things that will cause extinction absent emerging regulatory tech that can solve that independently. Also says it solves climate change. Again, none of this is external. The only real thing I have to answer here is the cross application for the stare decisis decide and the stuff about how it's not binding. Yes, it is binding. The courts would not. Yes, it is binding. But our argument, they have misinterpreted our argument. That reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what we were saying. I want to be very explicit here. The courts, justices can use whatever methodology they want, such as purposivism or textualism. That's up to them and what's appropriate in a given context. The plan does not affect that. However, if the method they choose would ultimately, in a given context, produce a result that is facially incompatible with the express command of another part of that statute, then they need to revise and resubmit because obviously they have flunked out of law school. I.e., when they pass regulations that are like it's okay to violate the CWA's preamble that says we must protect the waters because of some random grammar rules, that is bad. That is bad. The plan does not change how the judges get to a conclusion, i.e., whether or not they use purposivism or textualism, but it binds them and forces the conclusion to be in line with the statute. It does not matter what they do to get there. All of their stuff is not in the context of hypertextualism or specific impact scenario. It is just contextualized to when judges are given it. It is just contextualized to when judges get to choose whatever they want for the conclusion for like what they conclude. Like obviously we create binding regulations. You should read the card on the stare decisis that after the round if you don't believe me. It is excellent and draws this distinction. The federalism decide. Going to do some top level framing. I'm going to answer the top level framing at the top. There's no external impact, which means I forgot to go to adventure. Going to kick out of the food scenario is not going for it, but the dead zone's impact is an external impact. The only thing I have to answer is the biodiversity defense. Doesn't matter because Halstead, it's not about biodiversity. It is about loss of all oxygen because of ocean hypoxia. Obviously, that subsumes their impact defense because it's not a small internal link. It literally kills off all plants because they would just not be able to get oxygen. All their evidence is about isolated studies. Does not assume all hypoxia. That this is what you get for reading generic impact defense. Federalism. Top level framing, mainly done above, but I don't have to win a large risk of any impact because none of their offense is external. The stuff about outweighing nuclear war doesn't matter. We read a bunch of impacts that aren't about nuclear war. The Terns case about states not implementing regulations doesn't matter because it's about emerging tech regulations and patents, which are private corporations, not state regulations. Going to do the numbers at the top. First is the Maui the discount they read is super non-unique. Yes, they might have one specific link evidence, but they've also read a ton of generic cards that any federal intervention in water law should stand at present. That's inevitable. That was the first two cards on the link level of the 1R. That's inevitable. First, permits exist now. This was dropped. Federal government already requires NPDES permits or non-point source pollutants in other areas that aren't KFOs. They've existed for a long time, which means that obviously takes out. Second is that Maui decision. They are misrepresenting the card. It doesn't say it was limited. The last line says it's, quote, the CWA case of the century because it expanded the federal government's authority to regulate groundwater discharges. obviously triggers their links about water regulations broadly. Third is federal intervention into water disputes. This is particularly damning because their case-law-specific link evidence is about interstate commerce. That's inevitable now because the federal government is intervening in interstate allocation now. All of their and fourth, other federal intervention. Trump was cool with cooperative models, but Biden is bringing back supplementary environmental programs, which is literally forces the state to enforce federal environmental law. That's myth evidence, post-states, all their evidence. The fact that federalism is high now is non-responsive to the numbers. The fact that federalism has survived two reasons. First is that the fact that federalism has survived despite numbers just proves one thing doesn't spill over. But second, we have read multiple cars such as the water dispute scenario and the water dispute scenario independently is predictive and says they will keep happening in the future, which means that if it's fragile right now, that just supercharges it. I only have to win a small risk of defense and a small risk that the alpha weighs because they just don't have external offense. Like this debate would be won in the margins. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or ask them. What time is the next round? 17
Oh,
minutes.
yeah. Shit. Who's about to die?
No, I can't do that.
But can I plug your thing real quick?
Yeah. Did you mark any cards? No. Did you get 12 cards?
Definitely start running for the next round.
Yes. Neg card option.
Good debate, good luck, folks. Unless you're debating us, then
Thank you.